Welcome to the Knowledge Base Ninjas podcast, where Gauri Ramkumar of Document 360 finds the best SaaS self-service knowledge bases in the world and then interviews their creators. Let's get started with today's episode.
Good day, everyone. Our guest today is Gururag Kalanidhi, technical writer at Freshworks. Welcome, Gururag, to the Knowledge Base Ninjas podcast. How are you doing today?
Yeah, hi Gauri. Thank you for having me here. I'm doing good. How about you?
Fantastic. I'm doing great, Gururag. First of all, thank you so much for taking this time. I know it's quite late there for you, but once again, appreciate your support and effort in towards this podcast.
It's my pleasure.
Yes, so thank you. So Gururag, just help me understand a little bit more about yourself and how did you initially get into documentation? What's been your triggering point to take this as a career?
Okay, so when I initially started, I started as a content writer. So my previous stints have all been into content writing, social media. So when I first, came across this role at Freshworks, I was quite intrigued. So when I sort of, interviewed for this particular role, I was actually curious, and I sort of, they told me that I'll be writing for customer-facing content that will be used by businesses to set up their product. So that sort of interested me because I'm somebody who believes in DIY, and when they told me that you'll be doing something on those lines where you're going to be writing content that helps people set up their their product. So the business that I come from, I work for Freshworks, and the product that I take care of is Fresh Sales CRM. And so for Fresh Sales CRM, our customer base is across industry segments. So we a lot of our customers are SMB customers who usually don't have the luxury of going and enlisting the services of a consultant to set up their CRM. So they predominantly rely on whatever documentation or videos that we share with them for them to go ahead and set up their own product. So this was the requirement that was asked of me. So you will, my hiring manager had told me that you will be writing content that will basically be used by folks to set up their own product. So that sort of was a triggering point, and I found it quite challenging and interesting at the same time. So I took it up.
Fantastic. So can I ask you, how long have you been into this role as a technical writer?
I've been here as a writer. My career is like 4.5 years long. As a technical writer, it's 2.5 years to almost 3 years now. So yeah, I've been at it for 3 years now.
Super. So I'm guessing you might have got involved in the early stages of process defining towards documentation. So If you can help me understand, what's your documentation process at Freshworks and or Fresh Sales, and who do you normally get involved in it?
Right. So we follow a very agile methodology here. So our product it's split into multiple modules, and there are multiple stakeholders who work on individual modules. These are usually your developers and the product managers who work together from the I2P process to come up with, a particular module. So by the time I got in, the product was almost a year or two old. So there were a certain set of processes in place, but when I came in, so I had to, take up the role. There was proper. Let me say that when it comes to technical writing, sometimes you don't get the exact amount of handholding you'd need to. It's always like you'll get started from scratch because let me set it straight. Right, this was my very first role, so there was quite a lot of a learning curve for that. So my role in terms of process always involved, working with the product managers and the developers to understand what a particular module is or a feature is, and then define how it needs to look like, and then go ahead and write the content itself for the particular knowledge base article.
Okay, super. So what role does presentation and formatting play when creating documentation, according to you?
Right. So when we looked at a lot of our competitors' documentation, when you take the SaaS industry per se, we cater to a lot of segments, right? So we cater from, say, a small SMB customer all the way to an enterprise customer. So when it comes to an enterprise customer, they always have the luxury of, sort of giving a dedicated team who can help onboard folks. And you look at their documentation, it's exhaustive, and, it covers every single edge case. But when you're writing for a product unit like ours, which covers the breadth of the entire market, we'll have to factor in even folks who don't have a lot of technical acumen to set up a product. So our role basically is to make content as, let's say, descriptive and as crisp as possible, that it's not very jargon intensive and it's easy for them to set it up. And when it comes to presentation, we rely extensively on, using screenshots and, using illustrations to make customers understand where a particular, how a particular product looks. Because, familiarizing them with the UI is one of the most important aspects of our content in the very first place. So that's where presentation comes into it. And when it comes to formatting, we try to maintain a very a standard guide, but at the same time we also try to ensure that it's not it's not very jargony, so that we, when people are on our page, we want them to read through the entire content without them finding it very technical to go and set it up. That's our process.
Okay, understand. So, when considering as important factors, what are your important factors when creating documentation?
The very first thing is, I would say, empathy. The customer that you're going to write for is somebody who necessarily is not from the same, who does not know what, how a particular software works or whatever it works. They're looking for something that's as simple as a plug and play device. They just want to get started on day one and get going with it. So, when you're going to when you're going to supply them with documentation that takes a lot of getting used to, then it's going to be quite hard for them. So every single piece of content that you write for them needs to be in such a way that, it's not hostile. It's very friendly and it's easy for them to understand. And so that's sort of that's the most important factor we consider. And the other thing is we try to ensure that we don't bombard them with a lot of information. Rather, we give them what's the basic minimum they need to know to get started and set up a particular feature and work with it. If there are certain edge cases that we need to cover, we try to cover it later on, or we try to reach out to them later on, give it to them as on a case by case basis.
Understand. So how big is your writing team? Gururag?
So there are two of us at this point in time. So since as Freshworks as an organization has multiple products, and I work for a product called Fresh Sales and Fresh Marketer. So for us, there are two of us. We handle it between us, and we work with different stakeholders, like I'd already mentioned, right? The product managers and the developers and the QA teams. So we work with them to understand what a particular feature is, and we've split between us. We've split the different. Say if every single product has X number of product managers, we've split them by two and share it between us and share the workload.
Understand. Super. So I'm guessing Freshworks document or Fresh Sales, your documentation is currently public, right? You don't need.
Yes, it is public. It is public. Yeah, it's available for all.
And do you generate any organic search traffic from the knowledge base?
So there is organic traffic that gets generated because of the knowledge base, because most of our content, we write it in such a way that it's already keyword optimized. So we don't we don't spend a lot of time on optimizing it for any sort of keyword. So whatever content is written naturally generates a lot of organic traffic, and that does lead to some inquiries here and there.
Understand. And have you seen any reduction in your workload after introducing quality documentation?
So in terms of workload, see, our goal our goal has always been to ensure that whenever there's a feature that gets released, it definitely needs to have some sort of documentation that gets shipped along with it. Because that has been when you have a fast moving product like Fresh Sales, when our product life cycle is quite fast. So we introduce a lot of modules quite often. So we always are in the process of catching up to whatever the product whatever modules are developed. So our focus always is towards ensuring that every time a feature or a small UI shipment happens, we ensure that there is the sufficient documentation has been added to it, and we also ensure that it's in line with whatever is required by the customer. Because whenever a module is developed, the PMs consider a use case and they see how it fits with the market requirements, and we also ensure that our documentation is in line with those particular use cases.
Understand.
And in terms of workload, So in terms of workload, if I must say, our intention is to, ensure that no customer comes back to our support teams and asks us, what is this feature and how do I set it up? Because once you ship it with a documentation, more often than not, they read the documentation and they go about and set it up themselves rather than reaching out to a support team and asking why how is this feature work and whatnot.
Yeah, understand. Super. So let's move on to the rapid fire round. Who have you learned the most about documentation from in your career?
I would say from my own sales teams, the sales enablement teams, because see, we've seen how pitch decks look like. So it's always, to the point, and it's always, let's say, it's crisp and focused, and it puts out what's the most important for you to get a deal. So we've sort of always looked at that and say, if that's the case, customers should also be able to look at, something that we write and understand just within a couple of seconds what we're trying to get at, rather than reading through entire paragraphs and then, arriving at a conclusion. So that's sort of been our benchmark all the time.
Understand. Super. So, can you share a documentation related resource you have recently consumed?
Do you want me to share a link? I can go ahead and share a link.
Yeah, please. You can always email me the link, but if you'd like to mention any, please feel free to mention. And whatever link you share, we will add it to the podcast descriptions.
Okay. So, I will share at the end of the conversation, actually.
All right. Okay. That's absolutely fine, Gururag. So what's that one piece of documentation related advice you would give to your 20-year-old self?
Yeah, don't write content that's way too, it's too flowery, or don't write content that's going to be for a story. Write content that's very, very crisp, and write content, from a customer standpoint. Don't waste your customer's time. Don't make them read a sentence for 2 minutes if you can, convey the same in less than 10 seconds. So that's yeah.
Very nice, very nice. So be short and crisp. Exactly. Is your message.
Exactly. Yeah.
Super. So, Gururag, I think we are almost to the end of our podcast. Any last tips and tricks you would like to share with our audience today?
Yeah. So I am always I've always been like, any content that you put out, just consider that you are familiar with the UI. You're always familiar with the UI. Don't make the assumption that your customer or the reader who's going to look at your documentation is going to be familiar with it. So write content and always back it up with, videos or GIFs or screenshots, so that they don't get lost. Nobody wants to read step 1, step 2, step 3, and then wonder, where do I find step 1 in the product itself? So always write your content in such a way that it carries some sort of an illustration with it, so that people don't, get lost when you're reading the documentation. Just try to keep it lively and, illustrate it in such a way that, they look at the image and they immediately go and try it out on the product themselves.
Absolutely. Very well said, Gururag. So once again, thank you so much, especially in the late hours of your day. And it was an amazing story to listen to, and how you got into documentation. And all I'm wishing here is good luck with your future engagements and much more products to come from Freshworks.
Thanks a lot.
Take care. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Knowledge Base Ninjas podcast. Please head to iTunes, rate, and provide honest feedback on the podcast. See you next week.